Britain. And the title of the talk is The US and China, Co-dependency and Deadly Rivalry. So I'd just like to ask Jack to begin. And after his talk, we'll have, as usual, plenty of time for comments and contributions. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Anne. Well, we've had the Z Donald summit in South Korea, and I don't know what people were expecting. I would very much expect that in terms of the top officials, they knew exactly what had been agreed and how things would pan out. I suspect that everything was choreographed, including shaking hands, when to do it, and everything, down to a fine detail. Either way, what we've got is a 1 year deal. And that basically means that what we're dealing with is something that's temporary. The expectation is that there will be some sort of deal, but clearly they couldn't agree to one. So we don't know what will happen over the next year. It's quite conceivable that given 12 months, we could be seeing again, tariffs slapped on, along with all sorts of, dire threats. I think what we can say is that Trump's claim that this summit was what did he call it? A 12 out of 10. That's just hyperbole. The United States, got something. China got something. So in terms of rare earths, which, as everyone knows nowadays, is vital for, defense equipment, phones, batteries, you name it. We seem to be surrounded by these, high-tech devices that run not just in terms of digging the stuff up, but processing it. It's Chinese. And my understanding is, at least the last figure I saw, is it's responsible for 92% of the world's supply. This is processed, not raw, which effectively puts it in a monopoly position. And what we had in return is the United States agreeing to lift its ban on high-end chips. China will now be taking deliveries of US soybeans. That's going to matter out there with big pharma. But I think the main thing here, the genuinely significant thing here, is that if we look at Trump, basically, when it came to friend and foe alike, except China, what we've had is the other side blinking. Now, I know that we've still got an ongoing struggle over it. Is it the Ronald Reagan advert, some bloody thing in Canada? None of this is over, but the basic message I take away from it, at least at the moment, is that the United States, held a gun to the head of friend and foe and like, and they all blinked. They all conceded to the United States. So that includes, Mexico, Canada, the EU, Britain. I don't know an exception to that, except for China. And again, my reading on it is, well, if you look at first time Trump, the Chinese weren't prepared for Trump to, rip up global trading terms that had been established over decades. It wasn't prepared for that, but second time round, it was. And Basically, the message from China is, well, if you want to hold us to if you want to blackmail us, we're quite prepared to stand up to you, and we're not going to concede to you. So it was the United States that conceded on this one. Okay, now why is that? I think it's pretty obvious, and that is that the United States is dependent on China. And you could argue, and I would, that China is dependent on the United States too. To what extent they can afford to decouple is a very much an open question, and depending on which mainstream, I'm talking about intelligent mainstream outlet you read, either the Chinese are dastardly long-term planning and the inexorable rise of China, and because of state control, it can direct things. There's going to be a truth there, that precisely because of central control, it can override the market. It can direct companies to do X, Y, or Z. It can, and in terms of where it is at the moment, at least the plan is to make itself less dependent on outside forces. So very much an emphasis, not on autarky or anything like that, but very much taking that sort of direction, as opposed to more trade abroad, more dependence on abroad. And of course, what that leads to is the struggle basically to secure resources coming in from abroad. And that is very problematic, at least at the moment, as far as China is concerned. Why? Because the United States still remains the global hegemon. It's still got the dollar. And when it comes to aircraft carriers and armed force, it's clearly the leading power. Okay. So again, just looking at what's been going on, I don't think it was an accident that as Trump boards Air Force One, he announces to the press that the United States will be resuming the testing of nuclear weapons. Now, in terms of my knowledge of nuclear weapons, at least at the present time, it might have been the case back in the 50s, you don't really need to test nuclear weapons. You can look at the components, you can look at the rocket fuel, your guidance system, you can upgrade, but you don't need to let a big bang off in the ground in order to know whether they work or not. So what this is performance. This is about the United States saying, we're crazy, we're aggressive. You might not like us, but fear us. That's my reading of it. There's no technical necessity. After all, the United States hasn't tested its weapons, in terms of a live explosion for something like 30 years. And the reason for that isn't because they've been remiss. It's because you don't need to. You can stimulate these things now on computers. And as I say, as long as the thing is regularly subject to maintenance, upgrades, and all the rest of it, which was clearly the case, there's no need to do that. And note, if you look at China, if you look at Russia, it isn't, or they haven't tested nuclear weapons. The only power that has, to my knowledge, is North Korea. And North Korea will need to see if the damn thing works. It doesn't know it. It hopes that that's going to be the case. The United States, China, Russia, they don't need to do that. Okay, so that's the first one. So the United States wants to appear to be aggressive. It wants to appear to be assertive. And obviously, that matters when it comes to issues like Taiwan. My own take on it is that we ought to be very cautious about this whole Taiwan thing. There's plenty of books around that have been saying, oh, it's 2027 that China launches itself to reunify the country. All I would say is that at present, using force is highly problematic and highly unlikely. All you need to do is watch a decent World War II film, about not Dunkirk, the other one, the Normandy landings, to see how damn difficult it is. You've got to have air superiority. You've got to build ports. You've got to get men and machinery, tanks over 100 miles of sea. This isn't like even the English Channel. And you've got US fleets there, aircraft, missiles. It's very unlikely, in my opinion. And indeed, what we actually have in military terms is the United States and its allies, but the United States patrolling the coast of China. It's not the other way round. It's not China that's patrolling, the Caribbean at the present time and threatening New York or Florida. So we need to get a handle on the real balance of power here. China is a real challenger. Yes, it didn't blink when it came to a trade war, but that doesn't mean that the United States is finished. It's a former hegemonic power, or for that matter, that China is anything more than a challenger. It is not equal when it comes to military questions. It's not equal in terms of its international alliances. And just to illustrate the point, if we look at Trump's sanctions on Russia, this is the first sanctions, remember, of the Trump second term. He's previously held back on the basis, well, I'm going to negotiate with my friend Vladimir. We both respect each other and other such talk. But given the failure of Alaska, given the abortive summit in Budapest, you have American sanctions on the two leading Russian oil producers. And what does China do? What does India do? Well, I'm sure there's all sorts of ways around these sanctions, but what they do is they suspend deliveries of Russian oil by these shadow tankers. That illustrates where power still is, at least at the moment. I'm not suggesting for one moment that China is reliant on Russian oil, but nonetheless, it's cheap. It is the natural trading partner. All you need to do is look at a map. You say, Russia, loads of oil. China next door needs lots of oil. Where would you logically get it from? Russia. And yet it's actually been Z, remember, in terms of this, what do they call it? No Limits Alliance, that's been the one that's should have been reluctant about the building of pipelines joining the Siberian oil fields with the Chinese. Why? Because it fears precisely American sanctions. It fears the power of the United States. So the United States can be defied, but there are limits to how far China, at least at the present, can defy the United States. So in that sense, what I'm arguing is that both of these powers are interdependent. They could potentially decouple. Certainly the logic of the situation is towards great power war. That doesn't mean it's going to happen, but that's the logic of events. Okay, just going to have a look now at two particular conflicts. Petrovsk in the Donbass, all sorts of stories about Russian troops infiltrating the city becoming a grey zone. This is interesting. I don't think it's a strategic turning point, but it is interesting just looking at the shift in Russian tactics. If we think back at the last city that Russia took, it was Bakhmut, and there were an awful lot of left wing. I don't really sympathize with Russia, but I do. Commentators that were talking about this being a strategic gain, that if Russia took this city, some sort of vast territories would open before its armies and you'd have some sort of push towards Kiev or something like that. I must, say that my own view is somewhat different. That yes, if this was at the beginning of the war and you didn't have a whole system of trenches and dragon's teeth and all the rest of it in place, then yes, as in World War II, this is perfect tank fighting territory. But what we actually have now is much closer to World War One, and we're talking about yards of territory. We're not talking about tens of miles. We're not talking about hundreds of miles. And what you've seen is a shift in terms of these two battles from what Russia was doing, which is deploying human wave tactics, just send one wave of troops after another wave, and you overwhelm the enemy. It costs you huge numbers of deaths, but nonetheless you take that trench, you make that advance. What they've done now is break up their units into small autonomous units, and they infiltrate. So the trenches are there, but they're not sufficiently manned. Small groups can get through, I presume at night, but I don't know. Either way, they get through and they establish themselves behind the lines and look towards being being reinforced. But the main thing that's happened, which is just like God help us, is the ubiquity now of drone warfare. I do think, all this talk that we had about a year ago, maybe 2 years ago, of Ukraine needing mainline battle tanks, and that was going to shift. This is all rubbish. The first contact of these Challenger tanks, Leopard tanks, Abraham tanks against Russian defenses, they couldn't get through, and more to the point, they couldn't survive drone attacks, and so they're incredibly expensive white elephants. And I'm not saying they are irrelevant now, but they're irrelevant. It's drones, and what both sides are doing is using huge numbers of drones on the battlefield. And now this includes wire controlled drones, so they can't be jammed. And you're in a situation, you just imagine it from the point of view of frontline commander. There you are sitting in your dugout, concrete, but your men can't move in order to get supplies in. You're not talking about trucks anymore. We're not talking about lorries. They would get, blasted. You must be talking now about people delivering, on their backs, ammunition, food, drink, fuel, to keep you warm. Whatever is needed on the front line, that's going to be delivered on foot now, because what you've got is a kill zone that, I don't know, 20 miles, 30 miles of where simply trucks just cannot cannot move. And so, yeah, we've got a World War One type situation of trench warfare, artillery warfare, but crucially now drone warfare. And I've given the statistics in a previous article that the injury rate has gone down or gone up. Gone up to a 1-to-1. So for every one of your infantry that gets injured, you've got one who's dead. And it used to be 3-to-1, that you used to lose one and 3 people would get in. The reason why you've seen that increase is drone warfare. The commanders no longer send out, rescue operations. There you are. I mean, you've all heard stories about poor buggers in World War One in no man's land crying out, help me, I'm, injured. And what the commanders are doing, so I'm not sending you out because you're going to get killed. We send 3 people out, 4 people out as a rescue mission. And instead of having 1 person that dies, you have 4 people that die. That's the situation. Also, of course, what we're getting now is the production of long range Ukrainian drones. And this is causing, I think, serious difficulties as far as Russia and its logistics are concerned. And indeed, if you combine that with sanctions, there's all sorts of, again, I'm very skeptical. I think you just have to be skeptical. I'm not saying I believe this or I believe that, but all sorts of stories in the Western press about, Russia's economy, interest rates, factories being closed, workers being laid off, and all the rest of it. I'm skeptical in the sense that, well, they would say that, wouldn't they? Nonetheless, I don't take the view that all you need to do is add up the Russian population, add up the Ukrainian population. It's obvious who's going to win. No, it's not obvious who is going to win. That's my view. And if I was going to take a view of who I suspect will win, it will be the United States. That doesn't mean that territory isn't going to be conceded, but it's going to be a US victory. Why? Because Europe will pay for this war. Europe will pay its 5% tribute to the United States. And either there will be a no war peace situation, or there will be a peace that's heavily armed that locks Europe and Russia together in an antagonism. Meanwhile, the United States can busy itself with China. That seems to be the logic that's going on there. And I would introduce the question of Venezuela in that context. Again, I don't know. I mean, I'm sort of expressing myself, and that's because we're dealing with the fog of war. If you read the Morning Star, the Bolivarian regime in Caracas is marvelous. It's socialist, or it's socialist orientated. And the reason why the United States wants to get rid of it is because it represents a wonderful example for others in Latin America to follow. And of course, we then, have the idea of the British road to socialism. Spew has it. Scottish nationalists have it. I presume that's the case in Ireland. An independent socialist Ireland would be such a marvel that everyone will look at it and go, we want some of that, except people will be starving. 1 million people, at least 1 million people, have left Venezuela, not because of political oppression, but simply because of dire economic necessity. Far from it being a shining example, in spite of all of that oil, no, it's a basket case. Now, again, my skepticism is, well, having said that, how will ordinary people take it when the Yankees have sent in, and they have, CIA teams? When you have the USS Gerald R. Ford, the world's largest aircraft carrier, stationed off coast, all sorts of attacks on small boats, drug boats taking place. How stable is Maduro regime? I mean, I just don't know. What we do know, and what I would at least make a guess at, is that people resent foreigners changing the regime for you. So in Iran, we know that the regime is unpopular. And yet, in spite of that, what you had with the air war against Iran is people rallying not to the regime, but to the defense of the country. I would expect something like that in Venezuela. But again, I just don't know, because the Venezuelan regime is bound to say that. The Morning Star is bound to say that. But also, I would also say that CIA and Pentagon planners would also, my guess would be, telling Trump what he wants to hear. And that is, this regime is on its last legs. One sort of blow and it will collapse. The sort of stuff I'm guessing. I've got no inside information, that the FBU told Putin before the invasion of Ukraine. That this Zelensky guy, he's a fascist, and everyone hates him, and all we need to do is send a column, down the road towards Kiev, and they'll be surrendering, just like they did in Georgia. It didn't happen. So again, I'm just saying, I don't know, but what I would say is that we at least ought to introduce into the discussion, and again, I've seen this in various publications, the question of oil and China. The United States has long sanctioned Venezuela. It's attempted to strangle its oil industry. Remember, it was nationalized. Chavez was able to use that oil wealth to redistribute wealth inside the country, big welfare schemes, um, you know, loads and loads of, progressive reforms paid for, crudely put in oil, with that being strangled. Not understandably, the country's turned to China, and China has been investing. And so one of the reasons that's argued, in American circles, we've got to get rid of this regime, isn't because it's a shining example that other people in Latin America will aspire to follow. It's international. It's about securing its control over oil. Just like if we look at what's going on in the Middle East, we need to understand America isn't dependent on that oil itself, but China is, and it wants to hold China in a subordinate position. Okay, with Russian oil, again, we get into the complexities and all the rest of it. Nonetheless, the United States is, to all intents and purposes, self-sufficient in oil. It doesn't need Argentinian oil. Others need it. Others need Saudi oil, Kuwaiti oil, and all the rest of it. Okay. Worthwhile mentioning the COP meeting in Belém, the gateway to the Amazon. All you can say here is that this whole COP process has been an exercise in, to use a phrase, hot air. We've had Paris 10 years ago, wasn't it? They all signed up. And what did they sign up to? They were going to limit global warming compared with pre-industrial times to 1.5 degrees centigrade. We are there now at 1.5 degrees centigrade. So if you look at the graphs, there you are. We're there. And of course, what you have with the global system is something equivalent to, to use a metaphor, the oil tanker. You can't simply turn it around. So the momentum is there to warm and warm. And the danger is precisely as the planet warms, more fresh water goes into oceans and you get a feedback. And actually, in spite of, the world being very successful in turning to wind power and solar power, the momentum is still there in terms of global warming. So the the Paris Agreement was to, well, 1.5, but to keep it well below 2. Um, as things look at the moment, will they be able to limit it to 2? At the moment, I see no reason to believe that that is possible. Everything points at the moment to the world going beyond 2 degrees. And to get an idea, I mean, we can't make exact predictions, but scientists are getting better and better and better, at looking at the future and modeling the future. And of course, what we've just had as a warning sign, surely, is, Storm Melissa in the Caribbean. And if you look at the devastation in Cuba, in Jamaica, but crucially in Barbados, as I understand it, this was the most severe storm in the history of Barbados. It was you can't get any higher. I'm sure they'll come out with a category 6 or a category 7 storm, but at the moment, category 5, that's the top category. And again, I listened to the news just like you all did. And what was frightening about this this weather system is how fast the wind was, but how slow it was moving over the land. So my understanding was that it was moving at 5 miles an hour. And yet what we had is winds of 150 or something like that. So just devastating the place. Now, of course, hurricanes are natural, but what we need to understand with this one and other similar storms is that what you've got is this extra that's introduced by human agency. In other words, if you didn't have industrialization, the storm wouldn't have been as severe. Now, of course, we're not proposing to go back, but what we're saying is that something must be done. And of course, we're in a situation, not only is more CO2 being released, but what we have is the global hegemon that I've just been talking about. Will it actually send a delegation to Brazil? It certainly won't be sending Donald Trump. Donald Trump himself, made his speech, didn't he, at the UN on this question, and called it the biggest hoax ever perpetrated on humanity. And what was his election slogan? Drill, baby, drill. So what we have is the global hegemon not only behaving in a more warlike, more bellicose fashion, but behaving in a completely irresponsible fashion in the midst of global warming that will clearly have consequences that are hard to imagine. I mean, here I am sitting in Britain, mild climate famously, and yet we get more and more warnings about the possible weakening and shutdown of, what I was always taught at school, the Gulf Stream that keeps this wonderful climate that we enjoy, i.e. mild winters. You can have the paradoxical result, in other words, in terms of countries like Britain, of global warming actually producing you the equivalent of Labrador type weather. So agriculture becomes poorer. It becomes an awful lot colder, an awful lot bleaker. It's the same with the spread of deserts, same with the Amazon jungle, all sorts of possibilities. But the point that needs emphasizing is you do get those, well, global warming, global cooling. Well, one country's loss will be another's gain. This really misses the point. Because what we're dealing with is established patterns of habitation, established patterns of agriculture. And if the rain stops, for example, again, I don't know it, but over the American Midwest, and the world's grain store withers and dies, That's not going to be easily replaced by growing grain in the middle of, I don't know, a green Sahara or something along those lines. We really are talking about something being extraordinarily rapid. Anyway, I don't have myself, and I'm sure comrades will agree with me here, I don't have any hope myself for COP30. Clearly, what is needed is a break with the logic of capitalism. It's as simple as that. That doesn't mean that is the solution. All you do is get rid of capitalism. We've seen agriculture, we've seen industry in the Soviet Union, and how destructive that could be. But at least gives us a chance. That's all you can say, that if you take industry, if you take agriculture, you put it under democratic control, that gives us a chance in terms of envisaging the survival of human civilization. Without that, things look exceedingly bleak. Okay, wanted to turn to the Prince, formerly known as Andrew, or is it Andrew previously known as Prince? What we've got to get used to. We've always called him it, by the way. We've always called him Andrew Windsor. I suppose we've got to get used to calling him Andrew Mountbatten. Original name Battenberg, of course. This was part of the royal family rebranding itself. So the uncle became Mountbatten, and the royal family, wasn't it Saxe-Coburg, became Windsor. Anyway, it was an embarrassment in World War One to be so German. Either way, the poor sod is now got to get used to life as a commoner. All I can say, Andrew, is it isn't so bad being a commoner. I know people don't arse lick and all the rest of it, but they do treat you in general as a human being. And I have to say, when I look at these people, the sort of life, the sort of upbringing they've had is in many senses a sort of perverted attitude, people fawning on you, people bowing and scraping, people agreeing with you, people indulging your whims. It's an extended childhood to me. I mean, the thing about growing up, at some point your parents turn around and say no, or someone else turns you're part of a society that shapes you in that way. Well, imagine growing up in the Windsor family in Buckingham Palace. No wonder the guy's a strange one. But the idea that he's the only one, and this is what's coming out at the moment, everything's against Andy. I mean, the latest story I've read is about him when he was a trade envoy, which was apparently a disaster, arrogant bastard. But yeah, there he is, isn't it, in Thailand? And there he has a hotel as opposed to slumming it at the embassy. And he invites in 40 prostitutes. I mean, what the hell? What the hell? I know it's not illegal. I mean, okay, I'm not going to get all morally about this. But I mean, we do have all the stories about Epstein and, orgies with girls brought in on, what's it, the Lolita Express. And this is the point I'm really trying to get to. The idea that his friends, the idea that his fellow family members didn't know anything about it and have just discovered it and therefore removed his prince title, that is just not credible. All of us have speculated about Randy Andy for decades now, let alone Epstein, right? So the idea that there they are, and you're sitting around the dinner table, and they don't ask him, look, what was the real truth about you and this Virginia girl, Andrew? And he turned around and said, oh, it's all a lot of lies. I can remember distinctly I was having a pizza that night. I mean, what would you do under those? You would laugh at him and say, oh, pull the other one, Andrew. Tell us the truth. Come on, just tell us. We all know that they know. and he knows that they know, and he knows we know. Everyone knows. Everyone knows. The idea that he forgot that he had sex with someone is not. I mean, even with his industrial scale of having female flesh available to, I can't believe it. And so what I'm saying is that, surely when we have 40 prostitutes, the policeman that's looking after him, the embassy officials, don't they report back? Don't government handlers report back? Of course they do. This would have been common knowledge, and it would have been common knowledge in the palace, in government circles, amongst press people. Notice Laura Kuenssberg on the BBC saying now we'll be able to ask questions about the royal family. Well, that tells me everything, that previous to this, they weren't allowed to ask questions about the royal family. And that seems to have been the situation. What about our present monarch? Yeah, he's the more studied of the brothers. Maybe he's the intellectual of the family. I don't know. Either way, I mean, the descriptions I've read, and this is again very, how should I put it, little insights, is former servants turning around saying when he gets annoyed, he'll just throw a book at me. I mean, how's that sort of behavior? He has someone who squeezes his toothpaste for him. I mean, I manage perfectly well by doing it myself. Why do I need a servant squeezing my toothpaste? It reminds me in that sense of the descriptions I've heard of the last emperor of China, who couldn't tie his own bootlaces. He'd never tied his own bootlaces. And, one of the things I appreciate about the 1949 revolution is how they treated their last royals. Maybe it's an apocryphal story, but I like it. And that is the last emperor was put to work, in the gardens of the Forbidden City, and learnt to tie his shoelaces, learnt to be an ordinary person. And that's my idea for William and Charles and all these people. Let them look after the garden at Buckingham Palace after we open it to the public. But the point I wanted to finish with is I've treated this in a very light way, a bit of moral indignation, I think, is called for, yeah. But I wanted to bring in the constitutional role of the monarchy. That this isn't simply some feudal relic. It's part of the modern constitution. This isn't simply some feudal hangover. You might as well say that money is a feudal hangover. This is an integral part of British capitalism. The prime ministers, the army, MI5, the church swears loyalty to the monarchy. This isn't just some fiction. This is something that gives the state cohesion. And in the last analysis, it serves counter-revolutionary purposes. So just as a thought experiment, I know I've done it before, imagine the unimaginable. Jeremy Corbyn leads the Labour Party to a victory in 2017 or 2019. You can make it up. And the Parliamentary Labour Party, the previous one, has been wiped out in a giant crash by two jumbo jets. And we've got an entirely new influx of MPs. They're all loyal to Jeremy Corbyn. Okay, the monarch, under those circumstances, great hopes in the country. People are looking forward to the Jeremy Corbyn. The monarch calls Jeremy Corbyn to the to Buckingham Palace and said, "Will you form a government, Mr. Corbyn?" Mr. Corbyn says, "Yes, Your Majesty," or "Yes, no, Your Majesty." How long would such a government last? A very short time. The Americans would put what did they call it? Pressure on MI5, deep state, the army. Remember, before Corbyn, was elected, in inverted commas, we had army generals, serving army generals quoted, we're not going to carry out orders from him. How long would we end up? How long would it take that we end up with Chris Mullins or a version of it, a very British coup? I would suggest it wouldn't take long. And the monarchy would be at the heart of that, as it was in terms of coup rumors that were flying around when I was young in the early 70s, the Duke of Edinburgh and other such types. I think that was covered. I never watched it. I think that was covered in the, didn't they have that BBC series called The Queen or The Monarchy or whatever? Either way, I think that was touched upon in that. But that's the point about it, that what we're dealing with isn't just a collection of oddballs, called Prince and King and Duck and stuff like that. What we're dealing with is something that's integral to the British Constitution, and something that the left does not take seriously. They only take it seriously when it comes to, well, usually it's weddings. What a waste of money. How costly is this? Why are we spending all this money? Okay, I just wanted now to bring things to a close. Two more items, very quick comment. We had two letters. We didn't plan it, I promise you. Two letters on Hamas. One from a former correspondent of ours based in New York that's saying that we're soft on Hamas. I don't think we are at all, actually. My analysis of Hamas is very much rooted in my understanding and writings on the Muslim Brotherhood. Hamas is an offshoot of that international organization. We've written about the Muslim Brotherhood, both in terms of its mothership in Egypt, but also in Britain and also in Palestine. And our take on it is that we're dealing with a reactionary organization. So its political program, of course, is about the 21st century. It's not about the 14th or 13th century or something along those lines. But what we're talking about certainly hasn't got anything to do with, how should we put it, any genuine anti-capitalism. You'll have anti-capitalist rhetoric at various points in its history. But to describe it, for example, as Tom McCormack does, as the foremost anti-imperialist resistance movement in the world. All I can say about that is God help the world, no pun intended. What we're dealing with isn't actually an anti-imperialist movement. To be anti-imperialist, I would have thought have to be anti-capitalist. And if we look at the Muslim Brotherhood, when it was briefly in power, or say in office, in Cairo after the fall of Mubarak, it's clear that Hillary Clinton, the Secretary of State, was at least toying with the idea of doing a deal with the Muslim Brotherhood. I mean, she was holding up the example for them to follow of Turkey. And I think, if the Muslim Brotherhood hadn't have been overthrown, it would have been perfectly content with such a deal. And indeed, one of the points we make, I think correctly, about Iran is that the mullahs in Iran, and I know they're a different branch of Islam and all the rest of it, but the mullahs in Iran will be perfectly content with a deal with the United States. They could live with that perfectly well. It's the United States that doesn't want the deal. It's the United States and its allies at the moment that doesn't want to deal with the Muslim Brotherhood. And that includes, obviously, in Palestine. But I do think that we need to get a correct handle on Hamas. But the idea that's put forward by Daniel Lazar, I just think is just straightforwardly pro-Zionist. It's not implicitly Zionist. I mean, he begins with the observation of Hamas executing people. How outrageous. I mean, there you are. You've had 2 years of war. What do you expect, Daniel Lazar? Some sort of trial as you would get in New York? There's your prosecutor, there's your defense attorney, there's your jury chosen at random, and you have a trial that lasts several months. This is fantasy land. The fact of the matter is, we're not making it up about these militias, these criminal gangs. You can see it on Sky TV. This isn't some sort of weekly worker plot. This is public knowledge. And what we're dealing with, people, you can make the argument that the origin of these militias, is some sort of just desperate human survival. But clearly they've been incorporated by Israel, and that is ongoing. And under circumstances where you've been under siege and under occupation for 2 years, that you're going to behave on the one hand this, on the other hand that. No, it's equivalent precisely, as at least I've argued, of the sort of treatment that the resistance movement in France meted out to collaborators of the Nazis. These people weren't put on trial. They were shot, they were tarred, they were feathered, they were humiliated. No, you didn't have, the norms of justice. And you, quite frankly, to expect it, gives away the agenda. And what we have with Daniel Lazar is blaming the oppressed as opposed to blaming Israel. What we've had in Gaza is years and years of siege warfare. What happened 2 years ago was an act of desperation, a prison breakout that surprised Hamas itself in terms of its success. Did they behave in a civilized fashion? No. Do you expect them to? No. It would be like looking at, as we've said, the Indian mutiny. Do you expect people to behave? No. So who do we blame? We blame Israel. We blame Israel's facilitators. And one of the reasons, of course, is in particular, is of course, one of its facilitators is Britain in terms of arms, diplomacy, in spite of the recognition of Palestine. We know in terms of the propaganda war that continues in Britain every day, the British establishment is pro-Israel, anti-Palestine. And I'll just finish with this. Yes, Hamas has survived. That in itself is a victory. But remember, we've argued from the beginning of this war that the real aim of Israel wasn't the elimination of Hamas. We've just said that militarily that wasn't going to happen. What it was ethnic cleansing. And what we've got at the moment is precisely that. Not completed, but roughly half of Gaza is occupied. And people have been displaced. That's what's gone on. And yes, it's a victory to have survived. But nonetheless, the balance within Palestine itself is radically against the Palestinians. And the only salvation is the working class getting its act together in the region. That's international solidarity is an important factor. But if we're talking about power politics, it has to be a socialist project in the Middle East, which of course can only happen in the context of a global change. The working class becoming what Marx used to talk about, the fifth power, wasn't it? I think that's what he called the working class in Europe during his lifetime. So you had Britain, France, Germany, and the working class. We need that sort of politics if we're going to do anything real when it comes to Palestine, if we're going to do anything real when it comes to war, if we're going to do anything real when it comes to global warming. We need the working class as a power. In my last 6 minutes, Anne, I'm just going to report a positive meeting. This was initiated by, I've got to get it right, the Democratic Socialists of your party. This was a meeting called at very short notice. We had comrades from Counterfire there. We had comrades from RS21 there. We had comrades there representing this or that, what are called proto branches. We had all sorts of groups, I have to say, I've never heard of. I was there representing the CPGB. I think we played a positive role in the meeting. We've elected, agreed a small committee to run this sort of coalition. The aims are very limited. It's basically the 5 Sheffield demands, you know, a representative conference, sovereign conference, freedom to establish minority viewpoints, etc., etc. But I think we need to be honest that the chances of us winning are very slim. What the hell this conference in Liverpool is going to look like, I just don't know. We're meant, as I understand it, to have 4 sets of different people coming for different sessions. The hall itself only holds a few thousand people. So, but how on earth that can be presented as democratic when you come into the hall and you're then presented with some, how long have you had to deliberate? How long have you had to consult? No, what you're dealing with is an atomized, you know, membership that has been chosen at random, not by branches, not accountable to anyone. And are we expecting them to rebel? No, of course we're not. So what we'll need to do, and this is something that is positive, is that there are going to be 2 fringe meetings at Liverpool. That's my understanding. One of them is being called by Zara Sultana. I don't know who else she's going to have speaking. I don't know anything more about it, but that's going to be on the Friday night. Is this her declaration of I'm the opposition? That seems to be. Is this her declaration that this conference is a farce and we've got to do something else? I don't know. But what we've got on the Saturday, and we've booked it up already, we've got a fringe meeting within which all the organizations that I've referred to already, and hopefully more, will participate in a discussion about where we go. My own take on it is that we need to be looking to the proto branches, not the Jeremy Corbyn structure, not reforming the sortition. I think that's just hopeless. Not reforming their political program or trying to amend it here or there, but using at least the initial dynamism that was there to try to cohere something. That is desperate, I admit. It's interesting to note, I know he's only a personality, but it was encouraging that not only did we have Counterfire there, RS21 coming out with their own, I think, right-wing views. We also had Ken Loach. We had Naomi from whatever it used to be called, Jewish Voice for Labour, and all that. So, you know, it was a good, constructive meeting, but it shows you also that we really need to begin the process on the left in Britain of programmatic clarification. And that certainly couldn't have happened at our meeting on Saturday. So, okay, it looks still very bad, but out of this terrible mess that Jeremy Corbyn has led us all into, maybe something positive can be salvaged. Maybe that's just me being the eternal optimist. But anyway, I'll finish on that note.
Okay.